6 p.m. here in Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Che with this Sunday's edition of Arirang News. It's been 12 days since the tragic accident, and Prime Minister Chung Hong-won offered to resign, holding himself responsible for the ferry disaster. Our President Park Geun-hye understood where he's coming from, but asked him to carry on for now. Our Yoo Li-an starts us off.
President Park Geun-hye has decided to accept Prime Minister Chung Hong-won's resignation, but said she wants to wait to release him from his duties until the Sewol-ho ferry disaster is brought under control. Chung had offered to resign early on Sunday amid mounting criticism of the government's handling of the accident.
I would like to express my deepest condolences for those who lost their lives and my deepest apologies to the victims' families. I'd like to apologize on behalf of the government for mishandling a slew of problems that could have prevented the accident to the government's initial and follow-up response.
He added that his resignation was long overdue.
I wanted to resign much earlier, but I decided to keep my position in order to deal with the accident and come up with a set of countermeasures. I've decided to resign because I no longer want to burden state affairs.
With Chung's resignation, a cabinet reshuffle appears more likely, and many others are expected to be held accountable for what critics have called a slow and inefficient response to the ferry disaster. Chung's sudden announcement was met with mixed responses from the Korean public. Some have criticized the move as inappropriate when search and rescue operations and investigations are ongoing. Others have asked why the decision was made so abruptly. On Saturday, just a day before he made the announcement, Chung had called a meeting with related ministers to come up with countermeasures in the wake of the accident. Chung's announcement prompted the ruling Saenuri party to urge the prime minister to put all of his effort into dealing with the aftermath of the accident, while the opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy slammed the move, calling it utterly irresponsible and cowardly. Yoo Li-an, Arirang News.
The search and rescue operation is, of course, ongoing at the moment, but just as important, our focus will be on the investigation into what caused the tragic accident and who is responsible. It is in full swing even as we speak. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the latest, and we now connect live with her in the news center. Ji-hye, I understand the prosecution's special investigation team raided another maritime traffic control center.
Yes, Daniel, and this one is on Jeju Island. Prosecutors and police officers investigating the case suspect officials there neglected their duty to monitor the area. They obtained CCTV footage and communication records and are currently analyzing the information. The officers have come under fire for not being aware of the seriousness of the situation at the time of the accident. Yesterday, the prosecution's Special Investigative Unit raided the Maritime Traffic Control Center in Jindo, also over suspicions they had given up responsibility for an area that they should have been monitoring. Now, all 15 crew members who were involved in the navigation of the sunken ferry are in custody and have been charged with negligent homicide, while the investigative team has wrapped up its probe into 3 crew members who were arrested earlier, including the captain Lee Jun-seok, and sent the case to the prosecution. All of the crew members are facing mounting anger and criticism for not even trying to save the lives of their passengers.
What about the investigation into the Chonghaejin Marine Company? Any developments there?
The prosecutors have put a travel ban on the family of Yoo Byung-hun, who's assumed to be the real owner of the ferry company and the CEOs of the ferry company's affiliates. The prosecution is looking into whether the family has evaded taxes, embezzled funds, or made illegal foreign exchange trades. The prosecution has raided 4 branches of an accounting firm that worked for the ferry operator and is suspected of having created slush funds for the company. The firm also worked with the ferry operator's affiliates, which are practically controlled by Yoo Byung-hun, whose 2 sons are the biggest shareholders of the ferry operator's holding company. Prosecutors suspect the accounting firm helped Yoo's companies forge audit reports. Some people related to the case, including Yoo's son and daughter, as well as the CEOs of the company's affiliates, are known to be abroad. They have been told to comply with a prosecutorial summons and return to Korea by this coming Tuesday. If they don't return, the prosecution plans to compel them to do so. Daniel?
It seems like the scope of investigation widens. We also have investigators looking into the irregularities in the country's port operations as well. How is that going so far, Jia?
Well, the government has decided to strip the Korea Shipping Association of its power to certify the safety of the nation's vessels. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries says that the decision was made because the association represents the shipping companies, which they determined is a conflict of interest when it comes to safety standards. The ministry is discussing how the safety of vessels can be ensured and whether it needs to hire new personnel directly or create another organization responsible for the task. It added that a system will be put in place as soon as possible, but an exact date has not yet been set for the action. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport also said today that it will overhaul the nation's disaster manuals. It said it will wrap up its restructuring plan by the first half of this year.
All right, thank you for that, Ji-hye. Now, search and rescue operations is continuing. As we mentioned, this is the 12th day from Pyeongmokhang Harbor, the nearest port from the accident site. We have our Song Ji-sun joining us live. Ji-sun, it's getting a lot colder there. I could see you shivering a little bit before we connected live with you. Thank you for being out there. Any developments there
it is
so far?
Raining. It has been raining from last night. And the tide, the wave, and the wind is very strong, hindering the operators, the rescue operators, and the divers from continuing their search operation in the water as well as here at the port in Pyeongmokhang. They have recovered one more body, a male body of Danwon High School students today, plus the two female bodies from from Saturday. That still now stands at 188, with 115 still unaccounted for. The divers are focusing their search on the 4th floor of the ferry, as that was where the cabins for the most of the high school students were located. But it is getting tougher and tougher each hour to recover the bodies compared to the previous days because of the strong currents that are getting stronger, which is now moving at a speed of 2 meters per second. That means a diver could drift up to 150 meters per minute underwater. And two, because of the debris within the ferry, like broken furniture, carpets, and curtains and cargo that are blocking their way into the ferry. The divers are there also expanding their search areas on the left side of the ferry, which is now laying on the seabed, further reducing the amount of time they can spend underwater, as it's more than 40 meters below the surface. Considering the time needed to decompress on the way back to the surface, with higher pressure in the deeper water, they can only search for a maximum of 10 minutes inside the ferry. The authorities here said the search will go on, but it's unclear when they can get back to the water as the rain is forecast until tomorrow, and the weather conditions are getting worse until the night. This has been Song Ji-sun reporting live from Pyeongmokhang Harbor in Jindo.
Thank you for that, Ji-sun. Moving on, it's been 12 days and the continued efforts for search and rescue operations not bearing a lot of fruit. Not all of the passengers trapped inside the ferry have been found. What is taking so long? Our Kim Ji-yeon tries to answer this question.
Efforts to find and retrieve the bodies of the missing on the sunken Sewol-ho ferry are being hampered by obstacles inside the vessel. There's a lot of debris and furniture inside, and it's piling up on the left side, which is laying at the bottom of the ocean at a 90-degree tilt. The search team had to break through cabin windows to get in and must pass through narrow passageways filled with debris.
Chairs, beds, and tables are blocking doors and the diver's passage.
Kim Jin-hwang, the Navy colonel and search officer, says that heavy objects are all piled up on the left side. And in addition to the water pressures, it's making it impossible to search every cabin of the ferry. Unfavorable weather conditions and the oil spilling from the ferry are also slowing the search. And as time goes by, the hope of finding passengers trapped inside the vessel is fading. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The families of those from the sunken ferry who are still unaccounted for have been waiting for nearly 2 weeks now. Most families have been camping out at Jindo auditorium, but as the weather has hampered search efforts and families are starting to lose hope. For more on the situation, we go live to our Connie Lee, who is standing by at the site. Connie?
Hey, Daniel, well, in an auditorium that is supposed to be filled with cheers and excitement has been the center of grief and so much pain for 12 straight days now. It's been a disappointing weekend for many of the families here as the search and recovery process has been slow due to the bad weather. Now, earlier today, the families here watched Korea's Prime Minister announce his resignation on TV. The families listened quietly as he took responsibility for the ferry disaster and apologized to the affected families. But at this point, the family members that I talked to said they just want to hear news about the search operation and they want all of the remaining 114 bodies out of that sunken ship as soon as possible. I also talked to one family member who said the Prime Minister should have resigned after the recovery operation was complete.
그렇죠. 사태를 수습은 다음에도 충분히 할 수 있는데 아직 수습도 이제 반 조금 더 해놓고 수습도 끝나기 전에 우리 사퇴했다는 것은 국민이 안상을 봤을 때 또 그러면 이렇게 사람이 자기는 책임 회피라고 사퇴해버린 게
He also explained that the families here are increasingly concerned that those who are still missing could be lost at sea. Now, as you can see, Daniel, the families are becoming increasingly doubtful that their loved ones can actually be found.
Shock, anger, followed by grief. The emotional stress must be extremely high right now over there, and the auditorium definitely looks less crowded than before.
That's right, Daniel. There are about 100 families still remaining here inside the Jindo auditorium, and there's a smaller group of family members waiting at the Pyeongchang harbor. However, this weekend, it is the weekend here in Korea, so we did have a steady flow of visitors coming to the Jindo auditorium. Now, despite the rain and the poor weather conditions, the families of the missing have been getting visits throughout the day from relatives, friends, and neighbors. Also, the people who live in this city have been making visits to the auditorium to write hopeful messages to the families. Not only is the road leading to this place lined with yellow ribbons tied to trees, there were also ribbons hanging right outside the gym and post-its with messages of encouragement and hope. Now, these messages say things like, "I'm sorry about the accident," or "We support you." People have also offered prayers in their notes for the families affected by the tragedy, hoping that their words can somehow give strength to those who don't have much of that right now. Reporting live from the Jindo auditorium, this has been Connie Lee.
Thank you for that, Connie. Now, the city of Ansan has set up a memorial for the students and teachers from Tanwon High School who died aboard the ill-fated ship. And the site has attracted an endless stream of people wanting to say their goodbyes. Ansan is the city most affected by the tragedy because 248 of its students are either missing or presumed to have died in the disaster. We now go over to our Connie Kim, who is standing by at an Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall. Connie, what's the mood like over there?
Hi, Daniel. Despite the gloomy weather here today, people from all across the nation have come here to pay their last respects at Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall. Now, since early this morning, students and adults all dressed in black have been waiting in line to see the faces of their long-lost loved ones one last time. Inside the altar, I've seen many people breaking out into tears as they laid flowers, saying they still can't believe what happened to students who were so young. The hall has set up portraits of the 143 Tanwon High School students and teachers who died in the accident. And there's a large screen set up on one side of the hall displaying text messages of condolence. More than 75,000 of these messages have been sent since the disaster. And outside the hall, mourners are leaving messages of condolence written on post-its. Here is some of what the visitors wrote.
I wrote that I am praying that these children do not have to suffer pain or sadness when they are in heaven.
I wrote that all of this is the fault of adults and that I hope such tragic accident will never recur. I wrote, "May God's blessing be with the deceased students and may all their wishes come true in heaven."
Now, going into the 5th day since the memorial altar has been set up, well over 145,000 visitors have come here and more are expected to come throughout the day. Daniel?
Connie, could you give us the details about where, how to get there, and when they could visit if they want to visit the memorial for any of our viewers out there?
Well, the city of Ansan is doing all it can to provide conveniences to the visitors who hope to come here. Now, there are direct shuttle buses that run from the nearest subway station, Gojan Station, to Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall. And with more visitors coming here, bus service operations has extended by 2 hours running from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. Starting Tuesday, an official memorial will be set up at Hwarang Park, which is about a 10-minute drive from the temporary memorial site. All the victims of the tragic Sewol-ho accident will be laid to rest there, including the Tanon High School students and teachers who passed away in the disaster. Memorials will also be set up in 17 cities and provinces throughout the nation. The first memorial in Seoul is located at Seoul Plaza in front of City Hall, and it opened to the public earlier this Sunday. The altars will remain in place until all of those who died in the disaster are returned to their families in Ansan. This has been Connie Kim reporting live from Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall.
We shift our focus outside of Korea for now. U.S. President Barack Obama has called Japan's wartime program of sexual slavery a terrible and egregious violation of human rights, which has ruffled feathers in the Japanese media. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
Was a terrible, egregious violation of human rights. I think Prime Minister Abe recognizes the past is something that has to be recognized honestly.
It is the first time that a U.S. president has officially and directly criticized Japan's wartime program of sex slavery. The remarks made during a press conference in Korea on Friday sent a shockwave through Japan. In response, Japan's Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Kato said the issue is not a diplomatic matter. In a television interview, he said Japan is trying not to politicize the sensitive issue. While the government tries to minimize the effect of the remarks, Japanese media outlets offer their own analysis. Kyodo News Agency and Yomiuri newspaper said Obama made the remarks to improve bilateral relations between Japan and Korea, the United States' two main allies in Northeast Asia. The Asahi Shimbun said, with Obama's remarks, Korea could now put more pressure on Tokyo to address the sex slave issue. Some point out Obama's direct criticism of Japan's wartime sex slavery program were the result of Obama's displeasure with Japanese Prime Minister Abe during a joint press conference held in Japan right after the summit between the two. During the briefing, Prime Minister Abe justified his controversial visit to the Yasukuni Shrine, which enshrines the war dead, including 14 convicted war criminals, by saying he will endeavor to gain an understanding of his respect for the shrine. Hundreds of thousands of women, mostly Koreans, were forced into sexual slavery at Japanese wartime military brothels during World War II. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The United States has decided to keep its policy of strategic patience toward North Korea amid threats of a fourth nuclear test from Pyongyang. Diplomatic sources from Washington said President Barack Obama said the U.S. would keep the policy, waiting until North Korea decides on its own to denuclearize during a meeting with high-ranking officials on inter-Korean policy ahead of his tour to Asia. Officials were said to have agreed that any alternative policy would make the current situation worse, given that Pyongyang has continued to develop nuclear weapons in the past 2 decades despite sanctions from Washington. With the decision, U.S. experts say it seems unlikely that even the threat of another nuclear test will push Washington to change its policy towards the reclusive state. North Korea has criticized a recent bilateral summit between South Korea and the U.S., saying it will not tolerate any challenges. The North's criticisms mainly targeted South Korean President Park Geun-hye. North Korean state media reported on Sunday that President Park had spoken ill of the North Korean regime and its dignity, as well as its nuclear development and its state goal of military and economic growth during the summit with U.S. President Barack Obama. The North also said President Park has chosen a path of confrontation and war with Pyongyang, and the North will keep going its own way. President Park sent a warning to North Korea at a joint press briefing following the summit, saying that any provocations by the North will result in new international sanctions and pressure on the regime. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry discussed additional sanctions on Russia with his Ukrainian counterpart on Saturday. And it looks like the U.S., the leaders of the Group 7 and the European Union will slap more sanctions on Russian individuals for its provocative movement on Ukraine's border. Our Shin Se-min has more.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry expressed his discontent about provocative Russian troop movements along the Ukrainian border in a phone call with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Saturday. The top U.S. diplomat also urged Moscow to free a group of observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, accused of being NATO spies and held hostage by pro-Kremlin rebels in the eastern part of Ukraine. According to a senior State Department official, Kerry also expressed concerns that Russia's provocative movements on the Ukrainian border and its support for separatists are, quote, undermining stability, security, and unity in Ukraine. Kerry's comments comes as the leaders of the G7 major economies and European Union agreed on Saturday to impose further sanctions on Russia over the current crisis, as fears that Russia was preparing an invasion of eastern Ukraine emerged. The G7 nations said they were moving forward on the sanctions due to the urgency of securing plans for Ukraine to hold their presidential elections in May. In a related development, Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk says that Russia breached Ukraine's airspace 7 times to provoke it into starting a war. Russia has denied the action. Foreign ministers of the European Union are expected to discuss additional restrictions, such as travel bans and asset freezes on Russian figures on Monday. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Shifting our focus back to the nation, Korean workers are being paid less in recent years, even though their productivity has increased. The Korea Institute of Finance said in a report Sunday, the gap between wages and productivity in Korea has grown since the 2008 financial crisis. Korea had the 4th largest wage gap after England, Japan, and Israel. The survey excluded Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, Spain, and countries that are not among the top 40 countries in the world for per capita GDP. The report also showed that productivity had increased by 9.8% within the same period. Now, otherwise, we have some discouraging forecasts here in Korea. The island of Jindo, close to where the ferry sank, will see up to 20 millimeters of rain starting tonight, along with strong winds of up to 7 meters per second. The condition will continue until Monday morning. And now, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. These are the stories we're following at this hour. More coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time. Do tune in then. Thank you for watching.